Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name's Hunter O'Haney, and I'm the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and very happy to have all of you here. Today's October 7th, 2020, and we've been doing this series now of live virtual talks and performances for the last couple of months since coronavirus hit the country, and it's been great to have all of you as part of it. Tonight, we're very happy to have Jordan Rutter here with us this evening. Good evening, Jordan. How are you?
I am great. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Happy to have you here. Where are we finding you this evening?
I'm at home in New York. We live in Harlem, and this is our music studio space.
Nice. Looks very comfortable. For those of you who don't know, Leslie Lohman, Stonewall is located here in Fort Lauderdale. The Stonewall National Museum and Archives. In our library, we have 28,000 volumes, and the archives are 2,700 linear feet of archival material, probably about 6 million pages. And if you are down here, please come and visit us. And you can find out everything about Stonewall by going to our website, stonewall-museum.org. You can sign up for these events as well too. These are free and open to the public. And we also tape them. And so if you have friends who are not able to see tonight's talk, it will be posted on our website and also will be posted online as well. And I want to do a shout out to our friends on Facebook. Thank you very much for being there. We're happy to have you as part of this talk as well too. And also I'd like to do a shout out to Emery Grant. Emery, you back there somewhere? Emery's the one who makes all of this happen. Emery, there you are. Hello, Emery. So it's nice to see you as well. And so happy that this is all happening. One final thing too, for you music lovers, next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be having a fundraiser for Stonewall, and Broadway star Sean McDermott will be performing, as well as comedian and author Judy Gold. So tickets are available for you at $35 a person. Emery will be posting stuff in the chat area and the Q&A area to give you a link for you to sign up and learn more about that. And also just a note about how we run tonight's event. If you have questions, throw them into the chat and into the Q&A part, and we'll get to them as we go through. We try to spend the last 15 minutes going through some quick questions. So Jordan, it's great to see you again. I don't think I've seen you, I don't know, probably in a year or year and a half.
Yeah, not since you moved to Florida.
Yeah, well, come down and visit us down here. You are from Florida.
I am, yeah. I have family in Jacksonville, so yeah. I know the area.
You grew up here, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Born and raised.
Do you miss Florida?
You know, I do actually. Especially with everything going on now. I've been thinking a lot about family stuff, and I mean, this has been such a surreal time for all of us, and I think we're all learning who we might have taken for granted in our lives.
Yeah, it's true, and it's a good time to sort of count your blessings and all those things. And so for those of you who don't know Jordan, Jordan is a vocalist based in New York City. They primarily work as an operatic countertenor and is as a creative consultant and performer in performance art featuring the classical voice. They've performed with the MET LiveArts, NYU Tisch, Origin Theater, off-Broadway, as well as many other opera companies throughout the United States. So let's talk a little bit. How was it that you got started in music? What was it that really lit the fire with you with that?
Well, you know, I'm from the South, so it was church for me. You know, I remember really clearly being a little kid and singing in the church choir, and we went to a pretty small parish, so it was I was the only young person involved in music there. And from there, my parents were pretty amazing about making sure that I was involved in extracurriculars. And I guess from from the time I started looking at high schools, you know, there was an arts magnet in Jacksonville, and I went to the art school for voice. I went to college for voice. I got my master's degree in voice, and here I am.
Yeah. And where did you go to undergraduate and graduate school?
The bachelor's was at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, and then the master's was at the Manhattan School of Music in New York.
So what was the difference between those two schools for you? I mean, obviously you were a few years older by the time you went to master's, but from as a music student standpoint, what stood out for you?
Well, I'll say that I think what I've learned and what I've noticed is that there's sort of two ways, or there's several ways to approach these things. So what I did was I went to a much smaller, younger program for my undergrad. And the advantage of that was that I got a ton of stage time. And when I got to my master's program, of course, it was very competitive, and I wasn't the only person doing what I was doing while I was there. But I was able to come in with a good deal of practical experience. And then the much more advanced level of instruction that I got there was, I think I was ready for it. I have a lot of colleagues who do those conservatory programs from the get-go. And I gotta tell you, there's there is something to be said for being in that system for, you know, 8, 9, 10 years by the time you get onto the circuit. I mean, those are some excellent singers that come out of those programs.
Sure. And so when you were undergrad, were you focused on opera as far as voice, or were you a generalist?
I was still finding my path. You know, when I was in high school, I was really thinking that I was going to do more of a singer-songwriter kind of thing. And that was really where I was at as a teenager. As a freshman in college, I got the opportunity to cover the leading role of Papageno in The Magic Flute. And I ended up going on. And I think one of the moments that I'll never forget is we were in Teplitz in the Czech Republic, about to open my cast for the show. And I'm standing there with my costume that I'm sharing with 3 other men who are much taller than me, listening to the overture. And if you don't know The Magic Flute, Papageno comes on about 10 minutes into the show. So I had to just stand there and not cry from ecstasy and excitement, you know. And I realized then it was like, this is it. This is what I really should be doing. And I was fortunate enough to get into opera in a high pressure situation. I mean, we had a pretty quick turnaround with this show, and I was young enough that I didn't appreciate how big of a role that was. And so that experience has really served me well, because I mean, as I think anyone knows, right, is those first few years in the real world, you really have to be ready to roll with the punches.
What year did you graduate from undergraduate school?
2013.
Yeah, wow, almost 10 years ago, which is sort of amazing. Yeah. So when you were in undergraduate school and making a decision about voice and sort of gravitating toward opera, how much exposure had you had to opera?
Very little. I mean, I guess more than most people in the area. Jacksonville currently doesn't have a full season opera company in the city proper. So there would be about one full opera with, you know, professional singers per year, and then the schools would do their shows. I was involved in children's choir, so we would do opera excerpts and concerts. I remember the Hansel and Gretel duet and something from Carmen, of all things. Yeah. But actually, I hadn't seen an opera before I was in one, so it was it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, right. It's a great way to learn it. And when you were in your later years in high school and early years in undergraduate school, what was the response to your friend or by your friends and your family about you beginning to show an interest in opera?
Oh, as far as I can tell, my family was uh, pretty excited that I was looking at something that was maybe a little less, or something more institutionalized than, because I was pretty wayward as a teenager. um,
Weren't we all?
yeah, and my friends totally didn't get it, but um, in a community like that, you find people who have things in common with you. And so, especially in college, it was, you know, they keep us in a total petri dish. And so it was all people who were in my program. There's about 30 of us altogether in no master's programs. So um, we got to know each other very well. And I mean, now all of my friends are in the business except for a few, but that really started in college. And I think there are a lot of singers who feel that way.
Yeah. And so then, of course, you went to New York to do your master's, and by then you were full-fledged into opera.
Yeah, I was ready.
And so you're a countertenor. Were you a countertenor then?
So I switched. I started as a bass in high school, if you can believe it, and then slowly went up. In college, I studied as sort of a high baritone, and I switched to countertenor at the in the middle of my junior year. So I did about 3 semesters as a countertenor in college, and then by the time I got to New York, that was really when I was only doing that.
Yeah. And so what was that process? What was that mental process like for you, where you be over those 3 semesters where you switched to a countertenor? What was drawing you into that part of the opera field?
Well, I think I had a lot of baggage associated with my baritone singing at the time. Um, you know, opera can be a very gendered art form, and it still is in a lot of ways. I mean, we're starting to re-examine that, but um, I began to realize that I was using my singing to try to claim a certain amount of masculinity, and I had been talking with my teacher at the time, and he was like, you know, this you are very musical. This comes very easily to you, but the voice isn't quite the right color or size to do opera, just so you're aware. So I remember before I had made the change, I was really looking at going into more academic studies of music, like musicology or something like that. Um, but it happened very suddenly. We were doing a certain kind of vocal exercises. It's common for high baritones to use head voice or falsetto or whatever you want to call it to exercise the top part. And my teacher decided that it sounded much better. There just happened to be an opening for that sort of soloist in another program. So I sort of immediately turned back to my original plan, which was to be on stage. And I I guess it was a total right place at the right time situation, but I did have to let go of a lot of baggage as well.
But of course, the difference there is a difference between high baritone and countertenor voice,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't something that you could just. It wasn't like just wearing a blue blazer one day and then suddenly wearing a green blazer. There was a certain amount of work that you had to do to be able to take on that persona and to actually own that voice in that way.
Mm-hmm. It's more like putting on high heels for the first time. Really. I in terms of in terms of what you do, it's for me it felt just like singing like I did as a boy alto when I was in children's choir. But it certainly had a pretty steep learning curve to it. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to unlearn, and I was doing it moving to a new city and really starting for the first time in my life to take my career seriously. I mean, I was very sort of devil may care when I was younger, and when you're in Jacksonville, Florida, it's easy to have an idea of being a professional musician in the abstract, but it's obviously very different in New York, where you go and you see, oh, my friend who's 2 years younger than me has their first Met contract already lined up.
Sure.
And that was good for me.
Yeah. So you enjoyed your 4 years in graduate school, and then you've been out for how long now?
It was 2 years. I was out at 2015.
Okay. And so that now you've been able to begin the early parts of a full-fledged musical career, in particular career in opera. I want to talk about that in a moment, but maybe we can see one of the clips that we have queued up to be able to give people a sense of your voice.
Yeah. So this clip is from, oh, we can talk about it after.
Well, no, you can go ahead and set it up.
Oh, okay. So this clip is from Handel's Ronaldo.
Yep.
It's the Act 1 finale, and this is from a recording session that I did a couple of weeks ago. Notice the giant plexiglass shield.
Oh, I do, over the left-hand side of your screen, yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So basically,
this is just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, all the opera audition application stuff, it's all digital this year.
Okay.
So this is my new part of my public portfolio, and we're sending this out. So
do you want to set the character up at all?
Yes. If there are any classic literature fans out there, this is an adaptation of Gerusalemme Liberata, the Tasso. And this character is a Christian knight who is pursuing his fiancée, who is kidnapped by a witch. And after being sad about it, the other crusaders say, well, let's go get her. And I make this appeal to the wind to bring me on my way.
Okay. I'm not hearing anything, Emery. And maybe we just need to start this again. So that was amazing.
Thanks.
We cut in there, but it's really so you taped that piece 2 weeks ago. You said.
Mhm.
How long did it take you to learn that piece?
Oh, that one I've been singing for years. It was something I put in my rep way back in college, and you know, I my personality is such that the second that I decided to make this change, I went to the university library and looked through everything I could.
Mm-hmm.
But it really took until the last year or so that I was really technically ready. I mean, as you heard, it's very complicated and it's a specialized style of singing, so it has to marinate.
Yeah. And of course, even though you have finished with your education at this point, the formal education, I take it you're still taking classes and still studying voice and music on a regular basis.
Yes, one of the things that's actually been really amazing is that because the opera world is pretty much on hold, I can take lessons and things still. It's obviously all done virtually, so it's not quite the same. But you know, the way my career shaped out was I had always had a project or something going on, and this is really the first time in a while that I've been able to just stop and figure out what I want to tweak and polish.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, because certainly for young vocalists or musicians like yourself, once you get into that period into your mid and later 20s and even into your early 30s, it's really a question of trying to piece a lot of things together so that you can continue to pursue your craft, but then also you have to pay the bills. Before COVID, how did all of that work for
Oh my gosh, this was gonna be my year, Hunter. I
you?
had, I had I remember it was around Thanksgiving or Christmas time or something, and I was getting the contracts in for this year, and it was like, okay, I have a project every month, and then in between stuff, I'm gonna be able to uh, teach voice lessons and sing in a professional choir, and and I do some other side odd jobs here and there, and between all of that, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And what always happens is about once a year, I get a call or an email or something where they need someone to step in. Um, and those are the jobs that pay really well.
Sure.
And
How big is the pool? How big is the pool of countertenors your age out there now? Are there a lot of male countertenors for people to choose?
yeah, um, you know, when I made the decision, the conventional wisdom was that it's so highly specialized that there's very little competition.
Uh-huh.
That is kind of true, but there's also because there's just fewer jobs for us. Um, Basically, you have a whole bunch of people around my age around the circuit and have similar experiences in the sense that they know how to prepare a role, they know how to uh, be on stage. So it is quite competitive, actually.
Is it? Yeah. And so tell us a little bit, because I didn't study music undergrad or graduate school, but tell us a little bit about the origin of the role of the countertenor. How did it come about? And some of the background.
Well, I mean, the part that everybody really wants to hear about is the castrati, right?
Oh, of course.
Um, so in the 18th century, particularly, well, in Italy, um, there were if a young boy had an excellent singing voice, his parents could uh, have his have him castrated, and it would prevent the voice from changing. And this would occasionally lead to them having operatic careers, and this would mean upward social mobility, which did not come by very easily back then. So that continued as a practice really well into the 19th century. I mean, we think of it as something that stops around 1750, but for opera folks that are watching, the last one was Meyerbeer's L'Africaine, which is really quite late. And you can even hear the last couple of castrati. There are cylinder recordings of them that are posted on YouTube. So
And just to interrupt for a second, are we talking about primarily in Italy?
it was primarily in Italy. They would import folks from other countries as well, but if you study the castrati, they all have these fabulous Italian nicknames.
Yeah, like
well, the famous one is Senesino. Farinelli was a nickname. Vitalizio, things like that. So the thing that ended up happening was, sure, this practice stopped, and it was right around the time that opera took a turn towards the more realistic. And so there wasn't a huge market for that kind of a singer anymore. And then in 1965, I believe it is, Benjamin Britten wrote his setting of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and he wrote the role of Oberon for a countertenor. And this role has a very limited range, but it reintroduced the concept of a man singing in that register as a male character. And then the resurgence of interest in Baroque music happened, and basically the countertenor voice has just become, the bar's been raised higher and higher and higher. And now it's at the point where we're singing all that same music half step higher, tuned higher than it was back then.
Wow.
And, you know, no surgery needed.
Thankfully. That's fascinating. So going back to that cohort of people in Italy in the 17th century, or 1700s, I think you said, what is the research and the scholarly knowledge about how queer of a group or same-sex oriented was that particular group? Is there any facts or history around that?
I suspect that the short answer is yes. I suspect that the conventional wisdom is a case of history being written by the victors. But there is some limited research that suggests that the castrati were really seen more as a third gender. Something totally fascinating is that Rossini, who was a 19th century composer, I mean, one of the greats, when he was describing his Petite Messe, which of course was in France, he writes that it's written for men, women, and castrati. And so there's at least anecdotal evidence that that this was really not seen as like, oh, they're men who have been castrated. This was, and of course, Italy even today has a different attitude towards the gender binary than we do in the States. So it historically has always been not quite black and white.
Yeah. And so today, now in 2020, when you look at, your own identity and you see your decision to be a countertenor, do you see any convergence of those things at all?
Yeah, absolutely. That was something I like I mentioned earlier. I struggled with that at first, and I think many of us, when we're first starting out, we like to sing with our, sitting on our voice boxes, and you manufacture sort of like an older, manlier sound. This was a case for me of, whatever higher power is out there, pointing me in the right direction. I got a lot of work right out of school playing children and then drag queens and other sort of like desexualized characters. And it made me appreciate my gender identity separate from the sexuality, from my masculinity. And it made me also be able to separate my gender identity from my art, which I think is something that it's like a journey that I'm still going through, especially in isolation like this.
Yeah.
But I work a lot with young composers and librettists, and I tell them all the time, I would love to do a piece that doesn't desexualize, non-binary or queer identities. And, it it takes baby steps.
Yes, of course. I mean, we've seen we've seen many small steps happen over the last couple of decades, but yet every time we make some progress, it seems like things are coming back and or slipping back, and we have the possibility of that happening. But it's so fascinating to hear how the exploration of your art and your music has actually been so aligned with the exploration of yourself and your own view about gender.
Yeah, I think that's, for many artists, that's the case, right? I have been having sort of like a return to Saturn kind of moment over the last few months, because I had the sense that when I was in my early stages of my career and my education, I was pursuing upward social mobility. I was pursuing heteronormativity and a place in society that was already carved out. And I think I internalized a lot of that from my own family. You know, I come from an immigrant family, and so that plus my queer identity created quite a vacuum in me that I don't think anybody really addresses in the first quarter of their life.
Sure, and just to fill people in, when you say you come from an immigrant family, just fill people in a little bit about that background.
Yeah, my father is a refugee from the Vietnam War, and my biological grandfather died in the war. My grandmother remarried, emigrated over here, and so now I have a white-sounding last name, but you wouldn't know it growing up in Jacksonville, Florida.
Right. But yet it's so amazing because your biological roots just, go so deep in the United States, and then also into mid 20th century or 1960s at least culture.
Yeah, it's I really actually think the convergence of exoticism in 19th century and early 20th century Italian opera, look at your Turandot, your Madame Butterfly, all that stuff. Lakme. Yeah. But then you think about the 60s and the fascination with Eastern cultures. And I've never actually thought about this, but I bet you it's not a huge coincidence that those two came up around the same time in this country. It's really something that the opera industry is facing its own reckoning with. I mean, these works exoticize and tokenize, and there are a lot of people who want to take another look at what that says to our audiences.
Yes, of course, the other thing that's so interesting is about culture in the United States and Western Europe is it's so derivative of Western European culture that it's nice that we're finally able to look at culture of other parts of the world and imagining a reinterpretation of it that be a little bit more honest, a little bit more realistic. Do you find that to be, do you bump into that wall as far as particularly in such a classical field, that you have so many people whose point of view is really based in Western European culture?
Well, yeah, I mean, I say this a little bit flippantly, but we are in the business of cultural appropriation, really. I mean, this is not, it's all imported from Western Europe. So a lot of, I will say that my experience as an artist of color and the experience of a lot of my other colleagues who are people of color has been that there's pressure for us to assimilate into this Eurocentric culture that is, I mean, I think there's a tendency to overstate or overthink the implications of it. But I mean, opera is a European import, so it makes sense that there's pressure within the industry to adhere to those kinds of traditions. What we're trying to figure out now is how to move forward responsibly. Companies really want to take better care of their audiences and to reach out to demographics that maybe haven't been going to the opera for generations and don't have that great grandpa who went to La Scala and then took their kids to the Met after moving over here. So, I mean, it makes sense to ask the question.
Yeah, no, that makes perfectly good sense. So I want to play another clip in a minute, but I just want to talk about maybe some more current things that are going on. And so let's talk a little bit about the fact that in the last month, we've had a member of the US Supreme Court die, who ended up being the first woman to lie in state in the US Capitol, revered by younger women throughout the country. The idea that there would be so many fans for a member of the Supreme Court of all places is just sort of astonishing to me. And the fact that people would pay attention to her. But she and her political nemesis, one thing that joined them together was opera.
Yeah, I mean,
how did that happen?
Well, because at least for me, and I think certainly don't want to speak of the late justices. Opera is about human needs. It's not, and at its core, it's about things that transcend our current circumstances. I mean, you think about why pieces like Madama Butterfly or Tosca, or these pieces that we've been doing for centuries, why are they relevant? Because that still matters. The story still holds weight. I read a beautiful interview with Francesca Zambello, who did a lot of work at Glimmerglass and is at the Washington National Opera now. And she talked about her experiences with Justice Ginsburg. And she said as much, you know, when they were discussing pieces like Fidelio or Goethe-Dammerung. The stories are about people who can't exist in stasis, and we can all relate to that. So it's not surprising to me that two people who interpret the circumstances of our practical world differently can relate in a more ideological, abstract universe where what really matters is what you want and not the direct ramifications of that. And in fact, I think it is to be expected that two people who feel very passionately would share that interest.
It's so beautifully said, and so it sort of makes me wonder as to whether or not that exact point, that two people who are at ideological poles at the absolute pinnacle of societal power, but yet ideologically so far apart, could actually find this art form and their shared appreciation of the human experience, when what they're doing with on a day-to-day basis, if it's not about the human experience, I don't know what it's about. Those are the decisions that they're making. It would be so fascinating to see if that difference, but yet that commonality, could be translated into future generations in some way.
I hope it can be. I mean, it informs a lot of my own philosophy and decision making. I am a staunch agnostic, and so I kind of live by these principles, right? But certainly it's not a given. We live in very uncertain times, and with things like the internet, which I think that the great minds have not totally figured out how that's changed our society yet. Sure. Or certain political movements, or, you know, worldwide pandemics shutting everything down. There's obviously still work to do, but I agree. I think what you're speaking of is a sentiment that keeps me going, certainly every day. I really do believe that you're right.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating because it just seems like you've really just hit the nail on the head there. I had not thought about it at all in the way that you just described it. That because all I've read, and I admit I don't think I've read everything about it, but all I've read about the relationship was their love for opera. But what you've actually put a finer point on it for me, which is the unresolved issues or the recurring issues in the human condition, which is what obviously must have brought them together. So that's really, that's a great observation. I read recently that the Metropolitan Opera in New York has canceled its coming season and is not going to come back, I don't think, until when? They're saying fall of 21 or fall of 22?
Yeah. So they canceled the remainder of their season. Our season kind of goes with the school year. So they will presumably be back in the fall. Yep. We're getting to the point where I think some of the bigger companies who could afford to wait and kind of see how things shake out are starting to make their season cancellation announcements. I think a lot of us in the business are not terribly surprised. I mean, once we saw that we were all going to be sitting here until the end of the year, it doesn't make you terribly optimistic about the next 4 months.
Sure.
But I certainly, my heart goes out to my colleagues who had debuts lined up,
yeah.
And that's really my concern as an artist, is that there are a lot of folks who simply don't have the resources to just wait this out. And, as a professional musician, I'm part of this entire industry that is depending on things like extended unemployment benefits to put food on the table.
Right. No, because there's no way that you can survive without it. It would be just like people who worked in farms, if suddenly the entire farming industry went away, or people who worked in hotels. I mean, certainly that has happened in certain cases. Any ideas about, it was tough breaking into this business before. It was certainly competitive before, but now when the number of opportunities are dwindling, and also what I fear about too is that there are smaller opera companies throughout the United States. Like, you've worked in many of the companies, very, very profoundly excellent companies out there, but yet so many of them operate on a very small margin because there may not be that big of an audience for them. Any sense as to what's going to happen to the industry in the next couple of years?
Well, I smile only because the thing is, opera is we don't get any funding from the government, right? It's all done through private donors, and opera is a notoriously expensive medium to work in. So a lot of companies will possibly spend less money than they were anyway. And it's because of the generosity of donors and community engagement that they're doing. And they're certainly finding ways to stay on board. What is going to be more telling, I think, will be the next few seasons after this. Basically, what happened was, if a production wasn't canceled outright, it was postponed to the next season. And I think what a lot of people outside the industry don't realize is that contracts are generally given at the very least 1 year in advance. When you're looking at some of these bigger contracts, I mean, you're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead of time. Like, I have colleagues who get contracts 5 years out. And so the real question is, like, what happens to those contracts? And does this snowball into something where people are having things canceled or shuffled around for years and years? I mean, right now, all the training programs are saying, well, we are still going to hold auditions, but we may have to give these spots to people who we've already accepted, or they don't know what they're going to do next year. I mean, it would be different if we knew that a vaccine was going to come out next week and then, magically come to all of us. But I don't think that anybody can say with any certainty that that's going to be the case. And so,
yeah, absolutely true.
You can't, make these decisions dealing with like millions of dollars, right, until you're really, really sure what's going on.
But of course, the other good thing, not to put a slightly positive spin on it, when there is that disruption, it does create new opportunities. And so opportunities that might not have been there. I think for those of you who, you know, have your eye on things that are happening, there may be new things that if we had been going along the same continuum before, they would not have been available because everything would have been so stacked up. But once everything got scrambled, there may be opportunities for you, for you and your colleagues to find things.
I think I'm especially interested in opportunities that relate to the audition process. A lot of companies are really trying to streamline, and the audition process is just like, it's so expensive, and you know, nobody really enjoys doing it. And I actually think that the cost barriers to the way that we hold auditions now is a huge reason why there's a lack of diversity in the artist pool. So I would actually love to see people who run these companies, you know, take a look at some of the changes that they're making now and consider making them permanent. I mean, artistically, you know, we will find a way, and people are having the right conversations as far as all that goes.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you have another clip queued up, I think.
Yeah, we do.
So tell us, before we ask Emery to play it, tell us about this clip.
Well, first I have to say hello to the composer, Brian Blasky, who's here tonight with us.
Brian.
So this is from a series of short operas that were produced by the American Opera Project and NYU Tisch, the graduate music theater writing program, for in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. This piece by Brian and his librettist Seth Christenfeld imagines a scenario where on the night of the riots, in a dive bar next door, there's a closeted Midwestern boy who has to decide whether or not he's going to go out and risk being outed to his family. This piece is called Outside.
Outside.
Yeah.
All right.
So here I am. All night when my friends make the choice
Just wonderful. How is it looking at that and not being able to hear any audience response?
Well, I mean, I heard a little bit of applause at the end, and I had the same thought. I was like, oh man, I haven't heard that in forever.
Yeah. So what happened to that piece?
I think it's still in development. Yeah, Brian, I know Brian was orchestrating it, and he's been in touch with us about recording some demos. I don't want to talk too much about, I don't want to speak for him.
Sure.
But yeah, it was one of my favorite projects of the year, and obviously I had a personal connection to it, so I'm glad that it's still around.
Yeah, no, it's really nice. And so for those of you who have questions, you can throw them on either the chat portion or the Q&A portion, and we'll be happy to get to them. We have just a few moments left here. So as you think now about, well, actually I have a quick question. Do you have another clip lined up? Does Emery have another one, or was it just those two?
It was just the two.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure if we had, since we had a little time left. So as you think about, New York slowly coming back to normal and the world coming back to normal, you've talked about this some, but you've obviously been spending a lot of time trying to continue to hone your craft. I take it you've been spending a lot of time reaching out to others and keeping communications in place. What's your strategy for the next year?
I think the most important thing for me right now is to go back to the craft. I keep a running list of excerpts and selections that I'm preparing, and so I really want to take the time to go through my my creative process, which means translating the libretto, which probably there's not a translation for it with the stuff that I do, and really learning the entire role. I simply my product doesn't stand up for itself unless I do that step.
And just to explain to everybody here, I mean, you do spend time translating an entire 17th century or 18th century opera from either Italian into English or French into English or German into English for you to understand really what's going on. Yeah,
and I mean the thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about is that these libretti are not they're very beautifully written, and so the translation process requires attention to detail and talking to native speakers. There's some very important things. Like I'm working on this Russian piece right now, and I had to speak with somebody to find out that a word that literally translates to warrior is specifically a Viking, and that kind of work is what makes a performance lived in and feel organic.
Yeah, and particularly because in many cases you're dealing with original text, and so some of it is an ancient form of that particular modern language. And so some of those words may be out of use for several hundred years.
Italian operas are notoriously not in conversational Italian. And I could go on for a whole other hour about all the things that you can't use Google Translate for, or even a dictionary for that matter.
So just one last question here, and now that you've been out of school for a while and you've been able to get some chops there. Question number one, being an open gay performer, do you think that has helped or hurt your career any?
I mean, I guess it's helped my career in the sense that I play a lot of queer characters, and it's certainly been a boon artistically. The opera industry is not as homophobic as some other kinds of performing arts are. It's pretty common for performers to be open about their sexualities, and particularly with countertenors, I mean, the expectation is kind of that we're gay, and I mean, it's kind of an on-the-nose assumption to make that it applies in this case, I guess.
Yeah, and then also I think for somebody who, let's say somebody who's in their second year of a program now. And of course, now with COVID and everything else, and it was like, as we said earlier, it was hard before. Any particular advice you have for some of your younger colleagues now?
I have two pieces of advice. One is one that I got from Peabody Southwell, who's this beautiful mezzo soprano. And she just said, frankly, there is no path. And I think that's something important for people to remember. I mean, I went to a conservatory, but not for my master's program. You know what I mean? I'm not one of these like wunderkinds who went to the best schools, and you know. And I mean, I haven't done any of these prestigious high-level training programs. I really went through the contemporary music community, and I was starting to branch into principal main stage work before the pandemic hit. And so it is a waiting game for a certain, but on my second piece of advice is to just also, you know, I think it can't be overstated how much confidence it requires to be in this industry, but there's also something to be said for maybe the problem is that I'm not ready yet for this opportunity. And that's the sooner that you can make peace with that possibility, the happier and the better your art is going to be. Because I spent a couple of years, you know, really buying into the like, oh, well, I'm strawberry and they just like vanilla thing. And the problem with that kind of thinking, you know, it can do a lot in terms of giving you the confidence that you need, but it doesn't tell you how to move forward. And you know, there were some people in my life who have been really wonderful about pushing me and giving me a hard time and telling me that I have to do better, and being able to have a very compassionate relationship with yourself like that, I think has been probably my most frequently used tool in this business.
That's, again, incredibly profound and wonderfully said. And so, Jordan Rutter, it's been great to see you. I haven't seen you in over a year, and so it's great to have this opportunity to chat. I'm happy that you and your partner are both doing very well. Things are good and everybody's safe. And hopefully we'll see you here. And for those of you who are joining us, again, I'm Hunter Ohanian. And this has been part of our series, the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Be sure to visit us at stonewall-museum.org. Sign up for our weekly newsletter. Next week, we'll have abstract artist Paul Lee here, queer artist Paul Lee, and we'll be talking about the queerness of abstraction. And so we'll be going from opera to abstract work next week. And so it's one of the wonderful things about this series. And don't forget that we have our big fall fundraiser coming up. And if Emery can throw up another link to it, you can sign up. Tickets are only $35. Sean McDermott will be performing, as well as comic Judy Gold. And so we'd love to have you join us as well too. That will all be virtual, so no matter where you are, you can join us. Again, this interview will be recorded. It'll be posted on Facebook and also on our website as well too. If you have suggestions or ideas of other people to join us, please feel free to let us know, and we'll be happy to include them. So Jordan, great to see you again. And all right, goodbye. Thank you for being here. And thank you, everybody. See you next week. Bye.